When Gueneviere Turner was asked as a kid, "Where are you from?" often she had the line, "The Lyman family," as it was called, referred to itself in the plural as the communities. You see where we're going with this one, Austin? And it was an insular existence. He basically said to them that the spaceships hadn't come because their souls weren't ready. Gueneviere Turner is now a successful screenwriter. Welcome back to another episode of Too Good to Be True Crime. I'm going to do that one again. Welcome back to another episode of Too Good to Be True Crime. My name is Richard Taylor Woods and I live in the UK. Austin Turner is my partner in crime and he lives in Manhattan. This is Too Good to Be True Crime, the podcast where we investigate ridiculous and crazy crimes and look for the comedy in them. But sometimes, Austin, we just tell a story that we feel should be told and perhaps try to manipulate a crime into that particular story. How are you, mate?
You know, Rich, I could complain, but what good would that do me? It's just a busy week.
Just get on with it.
Yeah, let's just get on with it. You know, right at the top, I'm going to give a shout out to Rich, a big thank you, because, you know, for our listeners that may not know, each week we prepare, one of us prepares a story that we're going to share on the pod. And
yeah.
Rich knows that I have a crazy week this week, and I've been saying, no, I'll be good to share my story. I'll be good. And of course, this morning, I just couldn't get my notes together in time. So Rich has decided to swoop in and save the day, and we'll still be able to get a pod out, and Rich is going to share a story instead of myself.
I came out of my apartment the other day and I'd just been to the car wash the day before and I cleaned all the car and because I think I said on a previous pod we've been moving house recently, so back of my car's like a van. It was disgusting, and so I'm going to hoover it all out, get the jet wash on it. Came outside and I saw the side of my car and I was like, oh bloody hell! A bird has shat all the way down my car, like in 3 massive spots.
Right after you got it cleaned.
Literally the next day. And I was like, what are the odds? What are the odds? Anyway, as I got closer to it, I thought, that doesn't look like bird's muck. What is that? And I leaned forward and I think the balcony that was above where my car was parked, I think someone had been there doing a massive like gob, like literally going one of those and spitting literally from the balcony. And there's 2 massive, and it was disgusting. Like, listen, when it comes, like my little niece, she's young. You know, I used to babysit her quite a lot. I'm fine with shit. I'm fine with sick.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, snot and spit, I can't deal with that. That is
nasty.
Absolutely disgusting. You know what I mean? And I looked at my car and I was like, you disgusting. And obviously I have no proof. I don't know, but it made sense that the balcony above, it looks like there might be a couple of, vagrants and vagabonds that live up there.
Are you sure it wasn't your fiance thinking that the Kia dealership had parked in that spot?
She thought the car belonged to them. And I looked at it and I was like, that is disgusting. And so not only that, I went back to the jet wash and I asked for a ticket again. The woman was looking at me going, weren't you in here yesterday? Asking for the same thing. So it was so ground in, I had to get the jet wash pretty much on the it wasn't coming off. It was disgusting. So yeah, shout out and thank you to the people that did that to my car. And because this is a Too Good to Be True Crime podcast, I mean, surely there's a crime in that. Some sort of oral vandalism or something to my car. So thanks to my neighbours, whoever did that. Sounds like I said I live in a really disgusting place. I don't.
I know.
Nice, but
well, I know we have a story to get to, but since you brought it up, I do want to follow up on the Kia dealership. For any of our listeners that haven't heard, that there's a long-standing true crime being committed. Yeah, right across the street from where Richard lives, there's a Kia dealership, and instead of using the parking spots at the Kia dealership uses all of the street parking, which is meant for the residents.
Or the spaces, they do. And now, and the other day, the whole street was packed with their cars, and I counted 7 empty spaces in their car park, and I don't understand. And now there's this thing, I don't know what they do now, but sometimes if you leave, if you open the car door, but the keys are still in, and then you just hear a boom, 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 boom. I'm hearing that all day bloody long. So I think they need to actually remember to take the keys out of the car, because if they don't, maybe I'll go down there, maybe I'll nick it. Who knows? Hanging myself out to dry.
Yeah, give us a shout out if you have any ideas of what Rich can do. I'll put that as the Q&A for this episode.
But I don't want to do anything illegal, and I don't want to do anything that's going to get anyone into trouble. But I would like to make my point, in a clever way that means they stop parking there, and they understand it is unacceptable. That's what I'd like to do. So yeah,
For
please,
anyone who's
write
only
in.
listening, Richard was doing air quotes and winking while he said, "I don't want to do anything illegal."
Should we get into the pod proper?
Let's do it.
Okay, right. So I've entitled this one "Childhood Cult." It's quite an interesting one, this one, mate. I think you might like it. And the source for this is the New Yorker, actually. When Gueneviere, it's an interesting name. Her name is Gueneviere Turner. Any relation to you? Your surname's Turner.
I don't
Do you
know
know
any
Gueneviere
cousins.
Turner?
No Genevieres.
Okay.
That I'm aware of.
Okay, so when Gueneviere Turner was asked as a kid, where are you from? Now, for most people, as we know, that's just a casual question. You say you're from, New Jersey, New York. I say I'm from Oxford. But for Gueneviere, it's a difficult question because often she had to lie and she had to gloss over the facts because the real answer to her goes like this. I grew up in compounds in Kansas, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Boston, Martha's Vineyard, often traveling in 5-vehicle caravans across the country from one location to the next. My reality included LSD, government cheese, and a repurposed school bus with the words Venus or bust painted on both sides. That, although it's completely factual, is very hard for some people to believe. So usually what she would say is, I just come from upstate New York. Right. So Gueneviere was born into a family of hundreds of adults and 60 children in 1968. And she spent the first 11 years of her life among them. Now, the Lyman family, as it was called, referred to itself in the plural as the communities. You see where we're going with this one, Austin? And it was an insular existence. So they had no contact with anyone outside of that family. And the whole world was inhabited by people that she'd always known. She was homeschooled and she never saw a doctor. So it says only in the direst circumstances were the medical professionals called. So if there was a finger cut off, when kids were chopping wood, or if someone was getting scolded by boiling water, that was the only time that a doctor was called. And they didn't want to do that at that time anyway. They wanted to keep them very insular, keep them away. So she was also raised to believe that eventually they were all going to live on Venus. Imagine that. If you could live on another planet, Austin, what would it be?
Mars.
Mars, and the reason for that would be?
I just didn't want to take any of our listeners' time thinking of a creative answer, so I just said Mars.
If I could live anywhere else, I think it'd be the sun, because I'd always be warm and I'd always be tanned. I think I like that. So,
Okay.
she said in her early 20s, years after she left the quote-unquote family, she was describing her childhood to someone, and she said, and that person said, that doesn't sound like a commune, it sounds like a cult. Yeah, that sounded like a cult to you, I'm sure, Austin, right? So yeah, sounds like she's been living in a cult. Would that be fair to say?
Sounds like it.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's the difference between a commune and a cult? I don't know the answer to that one. Do you have a more articulate answer than your previous one for that one?
I would think that nope, I don't. I would think that a cult involves like some kind of manipulation, and I also would think that a cult, I'm pretty sure it always has to kind of center, in order for it to be a cult, it has to center around a leader or like a very small group of leaders. And they implement some kind of like manipulation. It often, I know, listen, I've seen all the cult documentaries, okay? I know it often involves like isolating people from the outside world, some kind of sleep or food, manipulation. So I'll be interested how many boxes this story ticks off for the cult criteria.
I think you bang on the money there, mate. Here's one theory: a cult never calls itself a cult. Okay, it's a term created by people, not in cults, to label and classify those groups. They kind of, classify them as being like extreme or dangerous. Many of the things that you just said, mate. So to Gueneviere, it felt quite judgmental, and it kind of made her feel, even though she'd left the cult at this time, we'll go back to how she did that. It made her feel kind of quite protective of her upbringing, because you don't know how it was, kind of thing. So Gueneviere grew up under the reign of a charismatic, complicated leader named Mel Lyman. So as you said, there's always kind of, there's a head of the pyramid, head of the family, head of the cult, as we've come to know it. So he was called Mel Lyman. So he was always, consistently issuing new rules for living. So in my research, it did say that Lyman never ordered his followers to kill anyone like Charles Manson did. But she thinks if Lyman had asked, that she's pretty sure that they would have complied. So in 1973, 3 members of the Lyman family attempted to rob a bank. One of them was killed, and the 2 others went to prison. So Mel Lyman also wrote a book called Autobiography of a World Savior. So I guess quite linking into into what we were talking about at the beginning of the pod. I guess he's sort of making himself into kind of like a Jesus Christ type character, I guess, isn't he? Like, I'm here to save you. To people who grew up in sort of more ordinary circumstances, it would be fair to say that Gueneviere's childhood might sound exotic, a bit scandalous, sort of, and fascinating, because as we know, cults, you said it before, you watch a lot of stuff about cults on TV and on documentaries. Cults are fascinating, aren't they? They are fascinating. You're like, how can people exist, in this sort of, type of living? But the one thing the Manson family and the Lyman family have in common is, like, arguably the sort of the banality of daily life inside these worlds, right? So if you live in a large group of people, there's always going to be dishes to wash. There's going to be like loads of laundry to dry, to hang up and dry. Yeah. And really their travel plans to Venus took place against a backdrop of like these everyday chores. Right. So it wasn't all acid and orgies and stuff. I've lost interest now, to be honest. Like, there's no, So, but it does say that acid was used by adults as a tool for spiritual growth. But to Gueneviere's knowledge, there were no orgies. So, I mean, maybe we should just end the pod right now, mate, to be honest.
Yeah. Cool story, dude.
So the young... Yeah, that's it. Done. Thanks a lot, everyone. See you next time. So the young family members, they sang together almost every day, and they harvested like strawberries and corn and sort of sang folk songs and things like that. And they foraged in the woods for like mushrooms. They went fishing. They had dogs, goats, cows, chickens. They had a Shetland pony that they called Stardust, and a cockatiel named Charles. Sounds like a farm, mate. That's nice. Lots of cuddles with animals every day. And the older kids... The older kids would often read the younger kids' stories before bed, and they'd all fall asleep, and there was like 3 and 4 to a bed, so they didn't even have their own bed. But I guess as kids, you just accept your circumstances, don't you? You're just like, well, this is our life, this is what we do. And they're probably quite fun, when you're a kid and you're building a den and stuff, and then someone comes in and sort of knocks the central column down and it all falls around you, but it's only blankets. These lot, they were living that dream for real. The Ouija board was a regular part of their lives. Oh. So they had shelves that were lined with notebooks containing like transcriptions of like conversations that the adults had with like their various spirits and stuff. And kids were only allowed to talk to one spirit. Phaedra was the name of this spirit. And sometimes they get, after dinner, they gather around and they get the board to summon up Phaedra. And only the older kids were allowed to ask questions, though. So one night, one of the questions was, what does Guinevere need to learn? And the answer came back that she was a lazy little girl. Oh, no. And she was devastated by this, mate. Yeah. The board had told her that she was lazy. And she didn't think she was, because she was always busy, like, cleaning and cooking and stuff. So anyway, after that, she cleaned the ashtrays in the compound for weeks, ashamed, but also she said that she was secretly thrilled that Phaedra even knew who she was. The spirit world knows who Guinevere was. So the day that she was told to leave the family in 1979, she had tears streaming down her face, and she just didn't know what to do, and she was begging to stay. So that night, on the 25th of August, she wrote in her diary, "I am totally stunned and heartbroken. I am speechless. I can't live away from everything I love. I can't sleep tonight, nothing. But I swear to God, I'm coming back, and I will be the same person. I will fight the world and get back to where I belong." And she said even now it's hard for her to write that because because of the Lyman family, and it's as writing this in the research, it's been 4 decades since that day that she begged to stay, and she says she still cares what they think. Now, the reason why she had to leave is this. So Geneviere's mother joined the Lyman family when she was 19, and she was pregnant with Gueneviere. And so in this particular family, children and their biological parents, they tended to be separated early on. So that she was no exception. And her mother and her were like rarely even on the same compound. That's strange, isn't it? You
That's
go into
very
this
sad.
life and then like that. Yeah, isn't it? Because the one person in your life is like, you know, a parent or a guardian that looks after you. They're your person, aren't they? So they were separated. That's the rules of this particular compound in which they were living. So she says that she didn't know her mother very well at all. So on the afternoon at the age of 30, her mother sneaked out of the family's Manhattan brownstone, knowing that she would never be able to return. Gueneviere was on the family farm in Kansas. Now, on every compound, there's a house for kids and there's a house for adults, and they called that the big house where the adults were. So Gueneviere was at dinner, and you know, there was like they were eating things, having a laugh, and there was, you know, only a few of the older people keeping them in line there. So the kids were having a good time. They were writing a play. And they were like getting ready to perform this play, and Gueneviere was going to play Eleanor Roosevelt. So there was a buzz at the intercom, and she was told to go up to one of the big houses. That one of the women said, "They want you up at the big house." And Gueneviere, she didn't think she'd done anything wrong, but you know, they were all used to being in trouble for the smallest little thing. You know what I mean? Like, I think she said she was punished once for looking at someone with that Scorpio soul in your eyes. Imagine if I said that to you, mate. Now, I'm not happy today. I got in the podcast because you're looking at me with that Scorpio soul in your eyes. Yeah. Whatever that means. I mean, what the hell does that mean?
I tend to get, you've got that Pisces look in your eyes. But I know what you mean.
Yeah, I get you've got that Taurus gaze, but you know, that works for me. That works for me. So she got to the big house. Adults there, they were like really serious, and she was told to go and talk to Jimmy. Now she liked Jimmy. He taught her to play banjo, and he was kind of one of the nicer adults. Okay. But then Jimmy told her that her mother had left the family, and she says her first reaction at that point was relief, and it meant that she wasn't in trouble. So she was relieved, I'm not in trouble. But then the reality came. She was like, oh my God, my mother's left, and she began to cry. But what Jimmy said after that was even more scarier to her, because he then said to Gueneviere, your mother's gone, now you have to go. And Gueneviere was like, what? I don't understand. Why? She asked. And he said, every kid here has at least one of their parents in the communities. Your father isn't here now, nor is your mother, so you have to leave. And she didn't even bother arguing. She just begged and she sobbed. She was like, please, I don't want to go. And he's like, no, you have to go.
But she wasn't even with her mother. Like, they kept them separated.
No. Yeah, exactly. And like that is in itself, that's an adult telling a kid, right, you got to go. You're no longer wanted here. Like, how can you live with yourself? How can you think that is, you know, the right thing to do? That makes me feel sad. So they had been brought up to believe that world people, essentially everyone else in the world apart from them, were soulless. And if you had too much contact with world people, you would get your soul sucked out.
You would lose that Scorpio soul?
Yeah, to be honest, mate, I would class myself as a world person, and I had my soul sucked out many, many years ago, mate. I've never recovered it. So anyway, the next morning she was driven to the airport. She was put on a plane to Boston by herself, and so she went to a compound there, and she was picked up with her sister, which was her mother's second child, whose father had died 3 years earlier. And she basically had one last shot at trying to say, please, can I stay with the community? And they were like, no. So they were driven to her grandmother's house in a small New Jersey town. They moved to New Jersey, and she found her mother sitting on the front steps of her grandmother's house. Right?
Do you know what town in New Jersey?
No, I don't, because that's your neck of the woods, isn't it?
I know. Yeah, now I'm dying to know. That's okay.
Yeah, I wonder if you knew it. I wonder if it was your town. Imagine. Yeah, could have been. So she saw her mother as a traitor. Yeah, she thought her mother had destroyed her life. She felt completely alone. And for the next few weeks, she cried herself to sleep every night. And she cried because she wanted to go back. And she felt her mother was the obstacle between like her having to stay where she is or being able to go back to everything she knew. And her mother would just keep saying, just wait a few more weeks. So then came school, proper school, frontier school. So she was obviously nervous to go here, but she was also very excited. So she was accustomed to being, surrounded by dozens of kids her own age. She'd been cooped up in her grandmother's house for like the last 2 months. So she was like, I need to be around people, and also like people her own age. So at this point, it was the sort of the middle of the school year, and she could hear her mother talking to the administrator, and the administrator was saying, where do we send? What do we send? How do we get our school records? Where do we go? Where do we send for these? And her mother would say, "Oh, her school burnt down, so that they're not available." And so this was like the first of so many lies that she had to tell just to appear to be normal.
Yeah.
And she soon learned to say, I'm from Boston. That was her knee-jerk, answer. I'm from Boston. School was a minefield. Her classmates, they could sense that she was a stranger in a strange land, and like she'd often have people say to her, "Oh, you look like you should be in Little House on the Prairie," all the time. So and also she learned a lesson about eye contact, because in the community in which she lived in, when people were taught, they would just look directly in your eyes and not break the gaze. And so she would be doing this to people at school. And then she said, someone who was actually really nice sort of said to her, you can't just stare at people. You can't, because it makes people feel uncomfortable and they think you're a bit weird. But that's all she's known. She's still a young girl at this point. It's sad, isn't it? So at 18, she'd been out in the world for 6 years. So in high school, she'd effectively erased any signs of her childhood. She didn't talk about it, and that made life like simpler for her, really. So sort of a year after she left the family, sort of one of the more powerful adults, they wrote her a letter. And in this letter, it said, "You're always welcome here and everyone misses you." Well, that can't be true, can it? Because they kicked her out. We work at striving for inner consciousness, self-development on the inside of the outside. This life is not for everyone. Only if you have Mel inside of you. I wonder what inside of you means. He's a fucking mental, yeah. When she was about to go off to college, she wrote to the Lyman family to ask if she could visit before she went to college. And so the members, they welcomed her warmly. She spent a glorious few days there. Slowly, the people in the family were encouraging her to stay. So I guess she's an adult almost at this point, so she can maybe come back. She's not a child. She doesn't need to have her parents there. They told her this was her home. This is where she belonged. And she did feel as if she was at home at this point. So after a day or two, she thought to herself, maybe I won't go to college at all. Pivotal, Austin, isn't it? Because you guys over there, and we have university, you have university and colleges. That's like kind of your moment. Go, right, where am I going? What am I going to study? What does the rest of my life look like? So if she made that decision not to go to college, this is it. She's in this community forever. Yeah. So she thought that these people, they really knew her. And she said this was the moment. And she thought, I'm not sure. So one night after dinner, as everyone sat around in the living room drinking, they were all drinking wine. She was sitting on the floor, taking it all in. And she said she felt like a surge of love and belonging, and like, this is where I'm supposed to be. She was just about to say, yep, I'm ready to stay for good. And a man who was seated in a nearby armchair put his empty glass in front of her as he was talking. And he didn't say anything. He just gave that like unspoken command, just get me more wine. And she took the glass, and she got up to refill it. She entered the kitchen. It sort of struck her that most of the women were in there doing dishes and doing the cleaning, floating around, refilling glasses, getting the kids to bed, and the men just sat around drinking, doing what they wanted. And she said she realised at that point, all the women are here to serve the men. And she'd been raised in that way. Of course, that's all she knew. Yeah. But now, that custom, it put her in like a kind of panic, and she was like, this is not what I want. This isn't right. This shouldn't be how we are raised, and this shouldn't be our obligation to serve these men. So at that point, she couldn't imagine staying. So she had suspected that she'd kind of latched on to that kind of gender hierarchy of the family because it was sort of easier to do than facing up to some of like the other disturbing truths about this. We'll call it a cult, because I think clearly that's what it is. And she just had to accept that she'd actually become a world person, just as that family had warned. The outside world had seeped into her soul, and she didn't consider herself as being better than them, but it did feel different. And it just felt like she'd no longer belonged. So she was sort of letting go of that sense of belonging, which was hard. And she cried and she said goodbye. Mate, in my opinion, thank the Lord that she did actually come to that conclusion, because otherwise she'd have been indoctrinated into that tenfold. Probably had kids would have been brought up, and then it just goes on and so forth. And that the Lyman guy, he just seems like an absolute tyrant, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So when she was in high school, as I said, she'd erased her past. At college, her background, it became quite a valuable commodity to her. So because I guess that everyone's trying to vie for position at college, and everyone's trying to tell the best story, everyone's trying to kind of invent their best background and backstory, but hers would always win, because like people would ask her where she was from, and her best friend would say, "Oh, tell them about the Moonies, tell her about the Moonies," because her best friend would just like loved the reaction of other people to her truth. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But she Guinevere, she felt bad because she was like, how can I talk about an upbringing that was so strange to people? Do you know what I mean? She that's her own history, that's her own sort of lived experience.
Yeah.
And how does she tell it without sort of sensationalizing it or turning it into a punchline?
Yeah, no one will ever understand really what she went through. And then, like you said, it feels like a little bit of like, my friend has a cool party trick they can do.
Yeah, and everyone's making a joke of it, as we are now, talking about like, her lived experiences when she was a kid. One day, child, you were going to be taken and living in Venus, living on Venus. It's like we're making a joke of it now, but that's her lived experience. And I guess as kids, that's what you absorb, and that's all you know. And I guess you take things literally at that age. But what she did do, she did start to learn that she shouldn't be afraid to reveal like the hard things about her life. When she was a teenager, she would ask her mother, "Do you really believe we're going to live on Venus?" I mean, how as a mother can you actually, how can you genuinely say, and if you say yes, is there a, can you say that person's like, clinically insane?
Right. If
they genuinely believe that they're going to be taken and living on Venus. So her mother never said yes. She didn't. She would just say, "Look, it's complicated.
Thank God she didn't say yes.
Of course it is, because for a start, everyone knows that Venus is uninhabitable by humans. I mean, it's ridiculous. Her mother would say you can hold a lot of conflicting ideas all at once sometimes.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I don't know. Could you argue that the mother was just not wanting to burst her child's bubble, or actually she just maybe wanted to believe it and actually couldn't, but actually knew it was a load of balderdash. Anyway, her mother didn't want to talk about it. And the important distinction to be made was that Guinevere had been born into a belief system and just simply accepted it, as we said, as children do. Now her mother, on the other hand, had made a choice to be there, and that choice for her mother, I think, was becoming incredibly hard to live with. But Guinevere would often wonder, did her mother feel embarrassment or like guilt, regret, whatever, and her mother never told her. So the notion that UFOs are going to take you to live on Venus are obviously crazier than the Christian idea of heaven and hell. Is that the same? Is it the same belief system? But obviously we have the longevity of like the Bible and the story of Jesus that has been absorbed into culture.
Yep.
As is the same. Could it be say in another 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 years that the idea of being taken to Venus could be as real as believing in Jesus? Who knows? So that Lyman family, you said Lyman, they predicted that the world would end on January the 5th, 1974. And on that date, Mel Lyman said they would be taken away to Venus. And as that day approached, the children were told to put on their favourite clothes and pick one toy to take on the journey. They sat in the living room all night listening for the hum of the UFOs, which of course Do you think they came? No, of course they didn't. But that prophecy failure, it didn't make anyone believe in Mel Lyman's wisdom any less, though, which is mad. He's brainwashed them so much that even though the UFOs didn't come, they still like believed everything he said.
Mate, it's a tale as old as time. This is like, I feel like this has happened with so many different cults where they're being told they'll take it to another place and they don't, and then they're when your brain is already in cult mode, you'll just talk your way. You'll just talk your way into believing just about anything, won't you?
Yeah, which is exactly what happened. And he basically said to them that the spaceships hadn't come because their souls weren't ready, and they hadn't done the work on themselves that they needed to do.
It's the work. You have to do the work.
Yeah, got to do the work. Got to involve yourself. Do the work. But Mel, you know, he professed, you know, he'd done the work, and everyone had ruined this for him because his soul was exactly where it needed to be. It's just exerting that grip of power, isn't it? You know. So anyway, they decided then they're not going to observe daylight saving time anymore. They're just going to have their own time. So there's going to be like the world time and our time. And now the kids, they weren't allowed to speak. Yeah, you think that's fair enough? Yeah, maybe we should do that. We should have maybe Too Good to Be True crime time, and everyone else time. You know, that works for me. So none of the apocalypses that they said came to pass. So the community that was just founded by Mel Lyman, it's still around today. And it runs a flourishing home renovation business in the Los Angeles area. But they wouldn't call themselves a cult. They would still call themselves a family. And for those cult members who survived over the decades, it's possible that they've just kind of like, you know, they might have morphed into the background because, you know, their lifestyle is given away to the demands of daily life, or maybe they've just been found out and they can't live that way, you know, anymore.
Damn.
So I think it'd be fair to say that like there'll always be people in search of like what these cults have to offer, because what it does do, obviously, it offers a structure, a solidarity, like a belonging to something. I don't know, some kind of hope, and maybe also, you know, in that backyard when you're looking up at the night sky, there's always that, you know, possibility that the spaceships could hear you and you'll be summoned at last. And so Gueneviere Turner, she is now a successful screenwriter, and she seeks out like stories about cults and kind of, you know, power and stuff, and that's kind of what she graduates to when she's finding stories and writing stories. And
nice.
She's no longer associated with them, mate. So that is the story of you know, Gueneviere Turner and her indoctrination into a cult when she was young. So many crimes, mate. I would say so many crimes that are kind of like, you know, solidified within that story. You know, obviously the first one should it be a crime? Like, you know, is it free will? Having kids in this kind of, you know, upbringing, in this kind of environment. What do you think?
I personally, I'm not against, like, if people want to raise their children in untraditional ways, which sometimes includes, like, you know, other people stepping in as parent roles. You know, sometimes there might be two parents, but grandma and grandpa also help take care just as much, or whatever it is. I mean, every family has its own thing. But definitely, like, I don't like the separation of the kids from their mothers. That's, like, the worst thing. And I know there are biological effects to that. That's not good. You can't do that. So that I'm definitely not down for.
Do you know what I don't like as well? I don't like the kids being brought out into the middle of the room and beaten and not no one speaking to them. And like, I wouldn't want, if it was my child, someone else disciplining my child doing that. That's bloody awful. So that's
the only thing I was going to say earlier is that I was thinking while you were speaking is that you know, if you're a single mother and you have one or two kids and you don't have anywhere to go, I think that there is a possibility that Guineviere's mother, you know, was kind of part of this group for the stability that it not even that it offered herself, that it offered for her kids. Whether that's a good argument or not, I can imagine that at least for some people, there's a point where they're like, yeah, well, this group is definitely messed up, but like I don't know what I would do other than that, and I have kids to take care of.
I guess also because they're so insular as well, they're not going anywhere else other than within this, you know, in the confines of this compound and this family. So the kids are, you know, and I say it, you know, in the loosest possible sense, quote unquote, safe, because they're not going to get themselves into trouble outside the community. Everything that happens is within inside the community. So I don't think kids should be forced into something like that. I think, you know, but obviously
No.
kids they're too young sometimes to make any kind of, you know, rational decision. But then you could argue, is the other crime her being told to leave? Because that's everything she's ever known. Her whole world's turned upside down and she's being told to leave because the mother's not there. If those parents cared about her and the other adults cared about her like they're saying they do, shouldn't they want the best for the kid? And
Yeah.
you know, if she's not spending much time with her mother and she's in a community, obviously Mel Lyman, I think he needs to do a life sentence somewhere because clearly he seems to be reigning. That sounds like there's paedophilia involved in there,
Yeah.
control, coercive
That's a
behavior,
nasty
all that kind of
situation.
stuff. Yeah, it's awful, isn't it? Yeah. So there's plenty in there, but apparently they're still running a flourishing home renovation business in the Los Angeles area. You could probably find them on Yale.com. Just get yourselves on the phone.
Good
if
for
you want- if you
Guinevere
want your home
good for Guinevere for finding her way through such a difficult and traumatic upbringing, and then, you know, finding a way to become a screenwriter and use her talents
knowledge.
to help herself and hopefully help others. We'll have to see we'll have
Yeah.
to check out some of her work.
There you go, mate. So that was the story of the childhood cult. And as I said, the source was the New Yorker there. Thanks very much, Austin, for joining us on this Too Good to Be True Crime. As always, mate, lovely to see you. And we'll be back with another Too Good to Be True Crime. Like, subscribe, and do all that other stuff. See you next time.
See you next time, buddy.